It's showtime.
There we go. What's up, everybody? Office Hours, episode number 58. It's me, Sto, and Nora on the other side, of course. How are we doing today, Nora?
I'm good. I can't believe this is 58 episodes. And I feel like this episode we've kept pushing back and pushing back and pushing back, but it's a good one and an important one, I think, to end the year with. So we're talking about professionalism. But Sto, how are you doing?
Doing good. Tired, but good.
Okay, so let's jump into it. And I want to say today's episode was suggested to us by someone, by Chizali on Twitter. And this is like, when we first started Office Hours, it was designed around like answering people's questions. So the more y'all tell us topics you want us to cover, ideas you have, things you're struggling with, we'd love to create episodes around your specific questions and needs. So definitely don't be shy about dropping comments about that or sliding in the DMs or whatever to let me and Sto know what content or what topics y'all are dealing with. But so today we're talking about professionalism, and I have a lot of ideas about this because I think a lot of what we have been conditioned to think is professionalism is actually just like white supremacy or patriarchy and isn't actually professionalism. But I'm curious though how you define professionalism specifically as it shows up like in the music industry.
I guess for me it just comes down to respecting people and treating others how you would like to be treated, or understanding how others want to be treated and following suit, respectfully, of course. I honestly think it's as simple as that. I think if we keep that in mind and keep like, I don't know, I've always thought like professionalism isn't necessarily about a business standard or whatever, but I've always thought it just comes down to having respect for one another and how each of us are trying to put in work and stuff like that, and doing our best to like actually like listen and support each other and stuff like that. To me, that's always been professionalism. And I think, especially in the music industry, we see a lot of lack of respect for people in multiple forms.
Yeah. And I think part of where it gets tricky, and hey, Aaron, shout out to everyone who's live with us. I think part of where it gets tricky is that respect is not a universal. So how you understand, define, and experience respect is going to be different than how I understand, define, and experience respect is going to be different than how someone else understands, defines, and experiences respect. And I think one of the biggest problems is when we enter projects or enter collaborations or enter, whatever it might be, there's a lot of assumptions around what the basis is, right? Like everyone's like, oh, it's common sense, but common sense is not the same for everybody. And so part of real professionalism, and this is how it ties into contracts as a professional practice, but also as like a
we have an episode on, by the way.
We do have a whole episode about it. And part of that is saying, look, like, let's really break down what respect looks like in practice. And so so traditionally when we think about professionalism, we're like dress code or like whether or not you see your tattoos or do you cuss or you don't cuss. But in the music business, like that shit's irrelevant.
Yeah, shit.
Right? Like it doesn't matter what you wear, that stuff is irrelevant. But the things that are relevant, communication, timeliness, like turnaround times on things, hours of communication, like those things are where you really want to stop and have a conversation about what are your expectations, what are my expectations around it. And I think what makes it especially tricky in the music industry is because there's so much ambiguity around like what's friends, what's business, what's personal, what's professional. Like and so part of, I think, professionalism in the music industry is it's really important for individuals to be really clear on what their own limits and boundaries are. Because so often I see people feel like they've been disrespected, or and this, hold on, let me say this in a way. Because it's so ambiguous in the music industry, right? Like, are DMs an acceptable mode of communication, or are they not? Like, there's
Right.
no clear answer for anyone. It's really important for each of us to know our own limits, our own boundaries, our own, like, what we're good with, what we're not good with, and then communicate that upfront. So because there's no, like, cultural, it becomes really important when you're starting relationships with people to establish those limits, or those expectations or needs, to communicate all that upfront, so that people know how you define respect and how you define professionalism. And then you hear it from them, and then you work together. And that's where the contracts come in, because once you agree with all that, you write it down.
Right. And that communication piece is really important. That's event like where I was headed towards next, where, I think a lot of professionalism or whatever, like, is covered under communication. Like Nora said at the top of this, like, everyone's version of respect is different, and everyone's, or like, what they feel is respect in a certain situation, whether it's, again, business or in the studio or on tour or whatever. So it's extremely important to have those conversations beforehand, because a lot of times people do, and I'm guilty of this as well. I've done this too, where you assume that things are going one way because you assume we're all on the same. We all have the same, idea of respect or whatever. And that's not even to say that, oh, they're blatantly trying to disrespect me because because of a certain action. It's just, I think it comes down to communicating beforehand, so you can avoid these conflicts and these misunderstandings. Because again, a lot of times it really ends up being a misunderstanding. It's not someone necessarily trying to maliciously, like, attack you or whatever. It's just those boundaries were never set beforehand, so they're just going based off of maybe their last experience, or again, how they're feeling. But if you sit down beforehand and you communicate all expectations beforehand, it can avoid a lot of this.
Aaron, I see your question in the chat, and I'm not really sure I understand it. So if you can reword it, or clarify it, Sto and I'll bring it back up. So, like, a lot of, and I said this at the top of the episode, but a lot of what we think about as professionalism is really these, like, cultural codes designed to make everybody the same. And in music business especially, it's the things that make us different, that make us shine and make us, like, good at what we do and all of that kind of stuff. And so rather than making, as we've been saying, rather than making these assumptions, it's really about taking time to be like, what do we need for this project, and how are we going to work with it? I asked this question on Twitter, before Twitter goes down. I feel like we're like on a sinking ship, and we're all just waiting for the ship to sink.
Right.
But I asked people, what are some of the most unprofessional things that they've seen? And the clear answer was lack of communication. And lack of communication when it comes to changes with shows, with meetings, with interviews, with different platforms. And the flip of that, the greatest, and shout out to Descendant, who gave a really, like, clear answer on this, who said that the great example of professionalism is being very detailed with what you're offering and what you expect in return. So again, it comes back to communication and transparency. But, like, so now as we get into the nitty gritty, part of professionalism is being really honest about money. And I think in the music industry, people don't like to talk about money, or we thought, we'll do it for the homie rate, or, we'll send you, like,
right.
And so I know that a lot of this makes people uncomfortable, especially when you're working with friends and stuff. But that's why it's even, and a lot of this we cover in the contracts episode, because they're so connected.
Right.
Professionalism is being upfront about how much you can or cannot pay people. So at Den sessions, like, we're not able to compensate artists. It's like first line of the second paragraph that I send out when we invite artists to perform, where very clearly it says, to be transparent, we are not able
Right.
to pay you, rather than making people guess. And then now they got to come and ask me, are they getting paid? And some people ask and some people don't. Right. So like that's professionalism. Professionalism is giving people all the information that they need about venue time, show dates, ticket expectations, sound specs, and like, you know, information about like equipment like having all of that. That's professionalism.
Because no one wants to deal with that stuff at the last minute.
No, and because look, what professionalism really, really is about is making sure that the people you're working with all have everything that they need to do their best job. That means they get paid on time. That means they have the equipment. That means they have all the information. But that also means that they're being treated in a way that makes them feel seen, heard, and valued. And so that's what communication really allows, is to say, look, I'm glad you're part of this team, and I'm communicating the information to you. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This is a hard conversation to have, because without getting into like specific situations, it's different. What might be professional in one situation is going to be unprofessional in another situation, and what's unprofessional in another situation is professional in another. You know what I mean? Like it really is case by case dependent. One thing. Okay. Well, yeah. Let me start. I have another direction I want to take us in, but so I'm curious kind of where your head is at right now.
Oh, all I was going to say is just, first off, definitely make sure you check out the contracts episode that we did, because it really does tie into this, because some of this is, like Nora said, some of this is like uncomfortable to talk about, but it's even more uncomfortable when you end up in a situation where you're clashing with people that you didn't intend to clash with because you didn't communicate beforehand. And again, you know, having those conversations beforehand and before you're really engaging in business, because again, you don't want to be in the middle of a tour or something like that and something goes wrong and then the whole thing derails because contracts weren't talked about and you know, expectations weren't set on numerous levels. And we're not in even with stuff like that, we're not just talking about money and you know, all that stuff and like, you know, ticket sales and stuff like that. It's even the little things like, yo, like who's sleeping where, who's covering hotel stuff, who's, you know, what are we doing food? Like there's so many different things that come along with professionalism in the music industry. But I think the way that we're kind of handling this episode is like, if you can communicate with your people beforehand, there's so much conflict that you can avoid if you just talk about stuff, the uncomfortable stuff.
And again, like the reason that's so important is because, like, I'll give you an example, right? Like time is one of those things that really is different for everybody. I'm Persian. If I invite you to my house for a social event and I tell you to come at 6 o'clock, don't show up until 8 o'clock because it's a social event and we're on Persian time. Like that's a real thing. But if I invite you to a meeting and I say 6 o'clock, you better be there at 6 o'clock, because that's like my expectation around work. Right. But because everyone has such different rules and customs around time, it's one of those things that's really important to be explicit about so people know. So with my clients, I'm like, this is what time we meet. You have a 10-minute grace period. After 10 minutes, that time is done and you did your session. Everybody knows this. When it's in the contract, I talk about it to onboard people. Like that's really clear. You might have a different thing around time, but it's about professionalism is about making our implicit things explicit, our implicit needs, wants, values explicit, and then we all agree on it. Now, there's certain things that really should be baseline. For example, do not hit on people you work with.
Yep.
Sexual harassment is unprofessional.
Right. Now, listen, it's very easy to be like, yes, as we stated earlier, very common sense, but that is something that happens in the music industry all the time. It is not something that can just be swept, that shouldn't be swept under the rug. It doesn't matter what event that I've been to, at least out of state. I'm pretty sure all I'll say is I've been to festivals in other states where stuff like that is happening all the time, and like it's not talked about and whatnot for insert whatever reason there. So, men, cut it the fuck out. What are we doing? Stop it.
Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit because what you said, Sto, about it's not talked about. And there's something about how people react to things where there's like, we oftentimes respectability politics for professionalism. And I want to be really clear, those two things are not the same thing. If we're in a working situation and you do something that makes me uncomfortable because you're hitting on me or you're making some kind of racial comment, or I've had people who have refused to pay me until I, go on a date with them and I'm like, yo, fuck you, like keep the money. That's not what this is. One guy in particular insisted I go hike. He had like a hiking fetish. And I was like, no, like anyways, I'm still traumatized. And the expectation is, even in those kinds of situations, women especially, and women of color in particular, are like nice about it. Because then if we make a big deal and we make a big stink, then we're the ones that are hard to work with. Or we're unprofessional because we caused the scene when someone else. And so that if we're really talking about professionalism and we're really talking about creating like safe, inclusive workspaces for people, you have to understand then that sometimes what you're and not like you, Sto, but like us culturally are reading as unprofessional is really a bias about how we expect people to act. That we expect women to be nice and quiet, or we expect like whatever it might be. And so part of talking about professionalism is starting to kind of question your own biases and expectations around what is it that what preconceived notions do you have in your mind, and how are you applying those to the people that you work with? Because there's a lot of there's a lot of sexual harassment. There's a lot of that kind of sketchy behind the scenes stuff. And because of this fear, people are quiet about it, and it enables it because we don't want to be labeled as unprofessional or problematic. Where in reality, looking at the cause behavior, that's the thing that's unprofessional. And that's the thing that's unprofessional. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm a little.
No, you're fine. The only thing I'll add on to that is, like we mentioned, we've been talking about this the whole episode about communication. Part of communication is listening. When women are speaking up about their experience in the industry, it shouldn't be as common as it is. And part of that is because people aren't paying attention and listening when women are speaking up, and that's something that we have to do better. There's no excuse for
that. So this is something you and I, switching gears a little bit, you and I talk a lot about. And how do you look at professionalism when people, like, they slide in the DMs, they have inquiries, they don't follow up, they do follow up? Like, what do you think of professionalism in that? Like, we haven't started working together yet, so there's no contract in place. But what does professionalism look like in the build up to a collaboration, a partnership, a contract, whatever it might be?
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, I feel like a broken record, but for me, it always comes down to communication. I'm one of the easiest people to work with, I feel like, and I feel like I'm extremely understanding when it comes to especially circumstances outside and stuff like that. And so, for me, it's like, especially if you're hopping in the DMs and we haven't even really like spoken before, like like that first impression is important. Now, no one's saying you have to like jump through hoops and like say, oh my goodness, I've read all your books and I have 5 websites and all this other jazz. Like, as long as you're respectful and communicate straight up about what you're looking for and, you know, and honest about what you're willing to compensate and stuff like that, like, that's really all it takes for me to like still work with you and adjust to your situation. Because that's really what it is. Like, I have no problem bending stuff. It gets weird when people expect a lot of work but don't want to communicate back, and at least in an effective manner. And then, I'm sure you've dealt with this too, where people are kind of like, they'll pop in and say, hey, like really trying to work. And then they'll disappear for like 8 months. And then they'll come back like, hey, yeah, let's do it. And you're just like, what, who, I don't even know. Who are you? Like what? So I don't know. Communication is really like a big thing for me. And it's not even just with like the music industry. It's literally everything in my life. I've always been big on communication, but what about you?
Yeah, I don't like, I don't have any expectations on people until we sign the contract. So I get people all the time who haven't, and especially because my rates aren't public. So I've set up a system where you have to DM me to ask me how much it costs. Right. So I can't be mad if when I tell you, I never hear from you again. Like I set you up for that situation. So like, I don't think people, like, I don't expect them that they owe me anything. And I think I'm flexible in the sense of like, sometimes I even send people contracts and life happens and they get busy. And so my professionalism, my responsibility is to send the contract that has all the terms, to follow up. And I can also set limits that say, hey, you've like started and stopped at this conversation 3 times. Maybe you're not ready for me, but I can refer you to someone else.
Right.
Like I have no problem walking away or identifying a behavior that says, hey, it's a lot of work for me to like prep a contract and put time aside for you, and then you don't show up.
Right.
That's to me that maybe this isn't good time. So for me, I don't take it really personally, but it does give me, and we talk about this in the contract episode too, it gives me information as to what our working relationship will be like. And for me as like a consultant, I also like, people pick me, but I also pick people. And I don't have to say yes to everyone who wants to work with me doesn't get a yes. So that's how I approach it. But I also, part of my limit is I do very little work for most people until we're working together.
Right.
Like until we're officially working together, because there's so much that I give away for free. I have a newsletter, there's Discord, there's office hours, there's spaces, there's Culture Fix. Like, so for me, that's part of how, kind of what I was saying earlier, for us as entrepreneurs, as creatives, it's really important that we set our boundaries, because otherwise people will continue to cross your boundaries if you don't set those boundaries really clearly straight up. Like they don't know what your limits are. So you got to with that. So yeah. And at the same time, if people come off like entitled, or then I have a whole different reaction, because that hits me the wrong way. But
I hear you on that.
That's a whole other thing. But I do think, and it comes again, like I feel like we keep saying, it's communication. The more you're able to, and maybe I think part of it is people are afraid of over communicating, but there's no such thing.
Right.
Like, it really is better for you, right? And if we're talking about music as a business of like relationships and connections, the more you over communicate, the more people know the context, and the more they can be responsive, the more they can problem solve. So, there's certain things I think that are like baseline, right? Don't sexually harass people, respect people's time, be transparent about money, be on time with money, like pay people when you say you'll pay people, send them their assets when you say you'll send them their assets.
Yeah.
respect the boundaries. I think another thing still that comes up is around time, because music business is like 24-hour business. What does professionalism look like around, like, do I email you at 3 a.m.? Do I text? Is it okay to text you at 6 o'clock? Like, how do you respond to that? I think that's another like key area around, like we say communication, but what are the boundaries around communication when it comes to professionalism?
Right. And I think, and again, like every person's going to be different. Like, some people, I know for me personally, I try to do the 24 or 48-hour thing. Like if you hit me up, I'm gonna try to get back to you within a day or two, max. And so again, like when you're working with people, like you gotta, especially if you're planning on communicating that late, you've got to communicate with the person that you're working with, because they might not be trying to get a text at 3 a.m. And that might not even be on they're not trying to work. They may be trying to work on their own stuff at 3 a.m. and be in their own zone, their own space. So you've got to, again, really talk with people when you're going to collaborate, especially on that kind of level, because you don't want to be communicating and really pressing and asking for things, because that's the other thing. I do feel like artists do be doing this where, oh my goodness, I need a beat like 3 a.m. or I need this mix or master or whatever, like right now. And their engineer or whatever, like they have, like everybody in the industry has lives, families, other stresses that are going on in their lives. Like we have to be considerate of people's time. And that's why communicating before you get into a situation or a large collaborative situation like that, like figure out, okay, like what's the best time to communicate with you? When can't I send a message? When can't I send an email or something like that? Again, all this stuff sounds like, again, common sense and simple, but like Nora said, a lot of us are working on our own like pockets of time kind of, and that's before we even get time zones into the picture. So, plan all that stuff and talk beforehand so that you're not hitting people up and rushing people at the wrong time, because it's an easy way to kind of break that relationship and burn that bridge.
You should never rush people. Like,
right.
Your emergency is not necessarily my emergency.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like a really important piece of really being mindful of like, what is the like, is there a crisis? What is the crisis? You also can't control like, I can't control what Sto does. I can only control what I do. And so that, again, that's like where you can send and kind of lead by example. I love what Sandroid is suggesting. Scheduling emails to be released in the morning is good if you work better at night. That's one way to do it. I didn't even
know you could schedule emails.
You can't.
Damn.
I'm not about to do the extra labor of schedule. That's like one extra step. I'm not going to do it. But my emails all have really clear language on the bottom that says, I work when I can. I trust that you'll work when you can. I respect boundaries around caregiving, self-care, X, Y, and Z. Respond to this when you can. So I might not like tune myself to your schedule, but I'm very explicit about there's no rush, there's no urgency. Don't feel like you have to respond to this right away. And I think that's one of the myths around professionalism. You don't have to respond within 30 minutes to be considered professional. There's no rush, there's no urgency. If you send me something,
especially in music too.
Especially if you send me something on Saturday, I'm not going to see it till Monday. Like, so if it's really important, like maybe you could, but like,
yeah,
but like that's part of, in a business that's 24/7, it's our job, again, as individuals, as creatives, as entrepreneurs, to protect our time and set our own limits. And so you really want to be mindful of what you label as urgent and crisis, but also giving space to other people and having compassion and giving grace to other people that they're also going through shit. So like, right, there has to be that reciprocity. And so you want to check your emails. You want to be timely with emails, but timely doesn't mean like 10 minutes. I like your 24 to 48 hours. I sometimes go longer than that. But
yeah,
you know, and that's also a good reminder of like, it's also perfectly fine to follow up
right.
with people. Like following up is actually really professional, but it's how you follow up, right? If you're like,
Hmm.
hey, I emailed you and I haven't heard what the fuck is wrong
Yeah,
with
what the
you.
fuck? And but artists be doing that. I'm pretty
That's not the
sure
way to do it.
both of us have gotten contacted like that before.
Yeah. But I had someone recently, we did a spaces a while ago where we listened to people's songs and gave feedback. And someone had said, and I remember because I was like, y'all send me your music, I'm gonna listen to it. And it just got lost in my DMs. And the artist, like a few weeks later, followed up and was like, hey, I just wanted to see if you've had a chance to listen to this. Like, thank you for taking the time. And I was like, oh my God, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
This had gotten lost. And I was like, oh, the link doesn't work. He was like, great, here's a new link. Boom, boom, boom. I gave him the feedback and it was great and it was lovely. So when people are busy and overworked, like all those things, following up can be really helpful because you got to remember none of this shit is personal. And I think that's part of where the like lack of professionalism shows up is when people take things personally. They personalize like business things and it's not personal. No one's like actively trying to bother you at 4 a.m. or like actively trying to piss you off by following up. So if you remember that it's not personal and you treat people nicely and you're kind and you say thank you and you spell their name correctly and you say, all those things, people want to be responsive.
Right.
Again, I feel like I'm a little all over the place, but you should follow up. Following up is professional. Just do it nicely.
Right. No, I agree wholeheartedly. Damn. I guess we're already up on a half hour, but yo, episode 58. Again, really go back and watch the contracts episode. I can't remember if it was in some other YouTube episode was in the description, so I'm not sure if it was the contracts one or not. But if not, I will go back and put it in there. It's a good one to pair with this one because in that episode we kind of go a bit deeper into like the conversation of it all because we get it. Like some of this stuff is awkward to talk about. Like we're not saying like it's super easy, like 10 out of 10, like, yeah, walk in the park. Like, so yeah, talking about money and talking about, all this other little stuff like can be awkward and uncomfortable sometimes. But those are conversations that need to be had so we can avoid even more awkward and uncomfortable situations down the line. So definitely watch that episode because it's, I think it goes pretty much hand in hand with this one.
Aaron says, great conversation. Thank you. As always, y'all, like drop your questions, especially if you have specific things, drop those questions in the comments below. We always come back and answer them. If you have other topics you want us to talk about, Sto and I have one more office hours this year.
2 more, I think, actually.
2 more?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, well.
Maybe.
Well,
I might be wrong with that.
Never mind. But if we've got, and then we're taking our own advice and taking a break, but we'll be back in the new year. Well, we've got a couple more episodes. Then we're taking a break. Then we'll be back in the new year. If you have episodes you want us to cover, let me know. Let Sto know. Remember that both of us are available for one-on-one consulting. There's also a link in the show notes to an article that I wrote about decolonizing professionalism, also known as Professionalism is Not About Proximity to Whiteness. So I really encourage y'all to read that as you're thinking about professionalism outside of the music context. Sto, final words?
Drink some water, breathe. There's a lot going on. Seasons are changing. I can already feel my mood changing and shit, and I hate it. So take time for yourself and to recover and rest. You deserve it.
Yeah, recover and rest. Love on yourselves. Love on each other, and we'll see you next time.
Peace, everyone.
Bye, y'all.